Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Discovery Season 5, Episode 5, Mirrors. So I'll have to start out with a spoiler warning for Discovery up to Season 5, Episode 5. If you have not seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, earlier in the season, I think with the first two episodes of the season, I talked about Maul and Lock and how I didn't think these were any good villains, and I didn't really give a shit about them, and they seemed kind of silly to me. And I was like, yeah, they're not going to work unless the show does like some drastic changes and develops these characters more. And in this episode, that's exactly what happened. They made me interested in these characters because they developed them more. They gave them a backstory. Now, they had been slowly developing them with episodes 3 and 4, like showing that they have this, romance. They're going for a Bonnie and Clyde-esque type duo. And so they started to develop them, but it still was like a bit iffy and not really caring about them. Oh, and there was the added thing that Maul was the daughter of the Cleveland Booker, who was Book's mentor. But that didn't really make me much interested in her, still even learning that. But this episode that shows the backstory of how they met did make me interested in them. It made me sympathize with them, and that's like the best kind of villains. The best kind of villains are the ones you can sympathize with, the ones that you understand. And of course, the big revelation in this episode is Lock is a Breen. So this is the first time in Star Trek canon that it is revealed what the Breen looked like under the helmets. That's always been a big mystery, and it's always one that I assumed would never be solved. I assumed that would always be part of the Breen's, part of the makeup of the Breen is like you're never going to see what's behind the helmet, because that's just how they're always going to be portrayed in Star Trek. But apparently we've been seeing what the Breen looked like since the first episode of this season. We just didn't know it, and then it was revealed in this episode. And I like how Burnham didn't know that. So it shows that the Federation, even in this century, still doesn't know what the Breen looked like outside the helmets. And otherwise, they would have been able to identify Locke as a Breen, but they had no idea that he was one. In fact, if I'm remembering correctly, and you can correct me if my memory is wrong, but I believe in an earlier episode when they were like examining Locke and Maul, they said that Locke was an unknown species, like they didn't really know his race. So that would make sense, and that this is kind of a mystery. Now, in the first episode, they mentioned the Breen and the Tholians as being threats to the Federation, and I was like, oh, the Tholians, and I was so happy. But I actually knew from the way they were talking that they wouldn't really get into the Tholians, because they emphasized the Breen more. In fact, after the first episode, the Tholians were never mentioned again, but the Breen were mentioned repeatedly. It's like, okay, they're going to focus on the Breen, and as much as I desperately wanted to see the Tholians, I was really disappointed that they chose to focus on the Breen instead of the Tholians. But this episode makes me feel better about that, because they really get into the Breen's background. I thought they were just going to be an ominous presence in the background, because they were kind of always mentioned in the background. They were never like the main focus. Like the main focus was always Maul and Lock. But then, of course, in this episode, we find out that Maul and Lock are tied to the Breen, and that Lock is in fact a Breen. And we actually get to see the Breen, which I wasn't actually expecting. I didn't think that we would actually see the Breen, other than like their ships maybe, in the season. But we got this episode. So this ties back to something I was saying in Deep Space Nine when I was reviewing some of the final episodes of Deep Space Nine, where Wayum has a line where he says, you heard the rumors that the Breen wear their helmets because their world is polar. It's like an ice world, and they can't live in our atmosphere. And then Wayum says that's totally untrue. And then Damar's like, well, why do they wear the helmets then? And Wayum's like, nobody knows. It's a mystery. Isn't that intriguing? And I remember saying that I hated that line, that I thought that was stupid, because it had been established in previous episodes. I think Ducad had said that in Indiscretion, that the Breen wear the helmets because, their world is an ice-cold world, and they can't exist outside of it. And so when they retconned that with Wayum saying, oh, no, that's actually not true, then I was irritated by that, because I was like, why the hell would they wear the helmets then? That's stupid. But, again, this episode makes me feel better about it, because it kind of... And I think watching The Mandalorian helped prepare me for this, because I sort of related to, in fact, while I was watching this episode, and they were like, I was like refusing to take off his helmet. It's like, this is my real face. And I'm like, they're like Mandalorians. Or at least that sect that Din Djarin Mando is in, that refuse to take off their helmets, as it's their religious creed or whatever, and they're considered like ostracized if they dare take off their helmet. And so as soon as they were showing the scene with the Breen, I was like, I get it. It's part of their culture that if they remove their helmet, then they're ostracized and they're not true Breen. Kind of ripped off The Mandalorian, but to be fair, this came first in Deep Space Nine. They reference that the Breen don't actually need the helmets to breathe, but they wear it for other reasons. And so they kind of, I think, took inspiration from Mandalorian. I was like, well, what if the Breen are like the Mandalorians? And that's why they wear the helmets. But that works. Like, it makes sense, and I think watching The Mandalorian, like, was a shorthand to get me to get that immediately. And I think it really worked for this episode, that Lock fell in love with Maul, and because of that, she convinced him to take off his helmet, and he did so. But by doing so, he was also falling in love with a courier, which was seen as a huge no-no. An alien, a non-Breen, was seen as an outcast. And from what I understand, he was already in a bit of trouble with the Breen, and he belongs to a royal family, apparently, if I'm picking that up correctly. And but he was forced to, because they asked him to kill Maul, and he absolutely could not do that. And so he attacked members of his own family and shot his uncle in the shoulder. He refused to kill him because he still loved him, and because his uncle apparently was the one who raised him. But he just couldn't let Maul die, and so ran off. And that really made me sympathize with them a hell of a lot more. But always in the background was the fact that last week's episode, when Burnham and Raynor saw the possible future of the Breen destroying the Federation if they get their hands on this device, progenitor's device technology, that's always in the back of my mind, because even though I sympathize with Maul and Lock, you know that they absolutely must be stopped at all costs. And that's what makes the dynamic really complex and really interesting. And so you get the scenes with Burnham trying to like negotiate with them and being like, and I love how she like bluffed and said, I had the progenitor's clue right here, and I believed her, and it was revealed that. But then I noticed that Locke kept holding on to this. I was like, well, why? And the camera kept focusing in and letting us know that he was still holding on to that. I was like, well, why is he still holding on to that if that's just a decoy? So it made me think that something's up here. And so when they did reveal that Burnham was just bluffing, I was like, oh, okay. That makes sense. But yeah, the negotiations he was giving with them and trying, and especially the scenes with Book, where he was trying to relate to Maul, and she revealed that she felt abandoned by her father and her mother, that her father was supposed to come back and take them to a colony in the Gamma Quadrant, which I can't remember. It's been so long since I've seen season 3, but like, did some people have warp technology? I remember there was a burn thing. I guess some few people did, or crystals were hard to come by or something. I can't remember, but I'm sure that the wormhole to the Gamma Quadrant's probably still open, and maybe that's how they get there. But anyway, and it's funny because she brought up the planet in the Gamma Quadrant again to Locke in that flashback, so that she still wanted to go there, which is interesting. So I think this may come up again. Thinking that might end. Alright, I'm going to make a prediction on how their storyline is going to end in the season. Because here Burnham was talking about, oh yeah, well, you're going to have to go to prison, and Locke's like, well, the only way I'll possibly agree to that is if I can serve my sentence with Maul, because I would rather die than be part of her. And Burnham's like, I get that. Which I guess, in the future, I suppose they have unisex or what are they called? Habitants or whatever, prisons, I suppose. But anyway, so it's interesting. So here's my prediction, my theory on what's going to happen with their storyline at the end. I think that they're going to find a way to report to Starfleet or the Federation that Maul and Locke were killed, but really they're going to let them go away and sneak away to that colony in the Gamma Quadrant and live out their lives. That's my guess, and I think that's going to be the compromise that's going to convince them to give the progenitors technology to them. It's like, look, if you let us have it, I think they're going to get it first, and Burnham's and Book are going to be like, look, if you let us have it, we'll just let you go, or you can go. We'll take you to the planet of the Gamma Quadrant, or we'll show you the way. We'll give you the resources to go there, and you can live your lives free, and we'll just tell the Federation that you were killed in action. That's my guess. That's a wild guess, and I seriously doubt that will come to pass, but I think that would be a fitting ending, but we'll see. They could go the more tragic route where Maul and Locke die, or one of them dies, but that doesn't seem to be Discovery's MO, at least in the later years. They seem to be more optimistic, but anyway, we'll see how that plans out. But I feel like they are building up Maul and Locke, even though they're definitely still antagonists, because if they get their way, it will mean the destruction of the Federation and millions of lives lost. So they're still definitely antagonists, but they're sort of building them up to be more sympathetic, and I feel like a true ending would be a good, happy ending for them and the Federation surviving. But we'll see. We'll see how that goes. But I liked the character scenes between Burnham and Book, and how she, revealed that when she was time traveling, she saw him in an earlier stage when they were still together, and how she missed that, and he's like, I missed that too. So the two of them, they're definitely going to get back together by the end of the season, or at least they should, and I'll be disappointed if they don't. But I think they're building to that, and Of course, yeah, I already talked about the scenes where Book was trying to build a rapport with Maul. I think we're going to build on that, and that would feed into my prediction of what will eventually happen. But anyway, other things we got in this episode, the Mirror Universe ISS Enterprise. I never had a problem with that. I mean, I suppose I first had a instinctual reaction of, Mirror Universe again. But, that was only for a few seconds. I got over that quickly. And they... I could hear the argument, and I think it could be a valid argument that wasn't necessary to have this ISS Enterprise. But I don't really think it hurts anything by having it. And it adds a bit of interesting lore to Star Trek canon, because if I remember correctly, they talked about how the Enterprise was used to stow away refugees, and that it was she talked about the Terran Empire and how someone was trying to make reforms, but then there was a pushback against those reforms, and so then these refugees escaped because they were being hunted after. She didn't know it was Spock, though, and I think that's interesting because she found out that Saru, or the Mirror Universe version of Saru, was the one who was responsible for saving the refugees, which I like. That's a nice touch. But she didn't find out that her brother was the one who started the whole reforms thing. Now, I don't know. I had to watch that scene again because they seem to imply that the reforms failed, but that actually... So maybe they didn't. Maybe I'm just remembering it wrong, because they didn't fail, because we learned from Mirror Kira in Crossover that they succeeded, and that's what allowed the Klingon and Cardassian alliance to take over the Terran Empire. But I don't know. That makes me feel a bit disappointed that the reforms and them actually stopping the violence is what caused humanity to be enslaved. But that's something that's been established in Deep Space Nine for many years. But just delving back into this, but it was interesting in how they revealed at the end of the episode that the refugees did in fact manage to escape into the main universe, or prime universe, or whatever you want to call it, and did manage to blend in, and one of them even joined Starfleet. And I think that's really cool. That's really interesting that there were Mirror Universe refugees in our timeline, and we just didn't know about it. I think that's cool. And they just had a chance to use the Strange New World sets. Now, I heard some people talk about, we didn't get... I thought there would be like a Christopher Pike, like a Mirror Pike cameo or something, which they could have done on a recording or something like that if they watched the recording. But that wouldn't really make sense for the story, since this takes place after Kirk and Spock, and when Spock was, reforming the Empire, so it must be sometime after that, and Saru was the one who was taking the refugees. And plus, I would remind you that Christopher Pike was assassinated by Captain Kirk in the Mirror Universe before the events of Mirror Mirror, and this obviously takes place sometime after the events of Mirror Mirror, so Pike is dead by the time this episode, by the time the ship was came to the prime timeline. But anyway, so we also get the storyline with Raynor and working well with the crew. I like this. It does show growth in his character. At first, he still did this thing with Stamets and Nadir, because they started going on their technobabble thing. He's like, tell me in one sentence. and when he asked about, I can't remember, something about trying to collapse, and they just looked at each other. He's like, okay, fine, you can use more sentences, because it's obvious that they had a lot to say. But the way he worked with the bridge crew and had them got to brainstorm and feed off of each other, and to come up with a solution, and I like how he asked, like Tilly said, they had to fire in a hexagon, and he was like, "Why do we have to do that?" She's just like fed his own logic or his own way of speaking right back to him, saying, "Oh, it doesn't matter. Just trust me, it works." Because he would say that sometimes too when they asked him. He's like, "Oh, don't worry about it." I think with the code, that how he knew that Burnham was trying to come back in the bigger ship, and they asked, like, "Well, how do you know that?" And he's like, "Yeah, don't worry about it." But it was revealed later on that it's a significant mythology or story in his culture that Burnham had learned about and read up on, and that makes sense. She's an exobiologist. Her whole thing was about learning about different species, although more of their biology and not their culture, but still, she's a captain now, and so it seems like that's something she would be really interested in. And I think that was sort of an interesting twist, and I love how we got to see Rayner working well with the crew and sort of earning that, and the way he related to them was a lot better than in the previous episodes, and he's like learning how to gel with the crew, something I compared him to Captain Jellicoe in the previous episode, but this is something Captain Jellicoe would never do. He never learned to gel and work with the crew. He'd always just bark orders at them and go, "Get it done," and that's why he sucked, and that's why he was a terrible captain, and he was one of the worst captains ever shown in Star Trek. But Rayner's actually good. They're showing him to be a good commander and good addition to the crew, and I like that. I think that's really good. So, my rating for Mirrors out of 10, I think I'm going to give it a 9. Excellent. And again, I might be overzealous, and maybe I'll reduce this rating in the future. But I think this is a really strong episode because it gets into the backstory of Maul Lock, and I think it does a damn good job, something I didn't expect this season to do. So I give it a lot of praise for that, and getting the background of the Breen and expanding upon them, and showing like the relationship that Burnham and Book have, and they're trying to relate with Locke and Maul, and also Rayner and him learning to gel and work well with the Discovery crew. All of that, I think, worked very well. And so I think this, so far, like this mid part of the season, usually the mid part of any season of any modern show is like when it dips and it gets into filler. But this is turning out to be the opposite. The mid part is when it's becoming a lot stronger. Like, I think these past 2 episodes have been a lot stronger than the first set of like 3 episodes. So I hope they keep this up. Discovery does have a record, unfortunately, of letting me down in the final end. Although they didn't do that last year, but they certainly did that in season 3 most definitely, and a little bit in season 2 as well, and season 1 for that matter. So they have a history of not hitting the landing and not paying off in something when the show starts to seem like it's getting really good, that goes downhill again. But hopefully that won't happen here. Hopefully it's learned its lessons and can maintain this momentum. Here's hoping. Anyway, and I'm very eager to see how they're gonna end the entire show. Very much looking forward to that. They did say they went back and did a lot of reshoots and rewriting once they learned that the show was getting canceled, so they could come up with a definitive ending. So I'm very curious to what that is going to be. Anyway, that is it for my review of this latest episode of Discovery. I shall be back next week to cover the next episode of Discovery. In the meantime, I'll be covering season 4 of Star Trek Next Generation, 1 episode at a time, and doing many more videos on Star Trek and many other shows and films as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.